Once, a certain king felt that if he always knew the right time to begin everything, if he knew who were the right people to listen to, and the most important thing to do, he would never fail in anything that he would undertake. He was so convinced about this thought that he immediately had a proclamation, meaning a public or official announcement dealing with a matter of great importance, made in his kingdom. Anyone who would teach the king what the right time was for every action, who the most necessary people were, and how he might know the most important thing to do, the person would be handsomely rewarded by the king. Learned, meaning scholarly, intellectual people from all over came to the court with varied answers. In reply to the first question, some said that to know the right time for every action, one must draw up in advance a table of days, months, and years, and must live strictly according to it. Others declared, meaning stated forcefully, that since it was impossible to decide beforehand the right time for every action, one should always attend to all that was going on, and then do that was most essential. They added that one must not let oneself be absorbed, meaning giving complete attention to idle pastimes. Yet, others said that it was impossible for one man to decide correctly the right time for every action, and that the king should instead have a council, meaning a group of advisors who would help him to fix the proper time for everything. Equally varied were the answers to the second question. Some said the people the king most needed were his counselors, meaning an official group of advisors, whereas others mentioned the priests, the doctors, and the warriors. To the third question about what was the most important occupation, some replied that the most important thing in the world was science. Others said it was skill in warfare, while some felt that it was religious worship. None of the answers convinced the king, and so no one got the reward. Instead, he decided to go to a hermit, who was widely renowned, meaning famous for his wisdom. The hermit lived in a small hut in a forest. He never left the forest and spoke only to common folk. So the king put on simple clothes and started off towards the forest. On approaching the hermit's cell, meaning a small room or house, the king dismounted his horse and left his bodyguard behind. The hermit was digging the ground in front of his hut when the king arrived. He greeted the king but continued to dig. The hermit was frail, meaning not keeping good health, and weak. He breathed heavily each time he struck the ground with the spade. The king told the hermit that he was there because he was puzzled and needed help from a wise man like him. The king then asked the three questions to the hermit. What is the right time to do the right thing? Who are the most important people? And to whom should he pay most attention? What are the most important affairs and need first attention? The hermit listened to the king, but did not say anything. He just spat on his hand and resumed, meaning continued digging. The king watched the hermit for a while, but feeling sorry for him, the king asked the hermit to rest while he dug the ground. The hermit silently handed over the spade and sat down on the ground for some time. The king dug 2 beds and repeated his questions. This time too, the hermit gave no answer, and the king continued to dig. Hours passed by, and when the sun began to sink behind the trees, the king tried once again to get the answers. Suddenly, the hermit saw a man running towards them from the woods. The king turned round and saw a bearded man with hands pressed against his stomach and blood flowing from under them. The wounded man reached the king and fell to the ground moaning feebly. meaning without strength. Unfastening the man's clothing, the king and the hermit saw a large wound in his stomach. The king washed the wound and bandaged it with his handkerchief and a towel, but the blood continued to flow. The king removed the bandage soaked with warm blood and washed and rebandaged the man's wound. The man revived after the blood stopped flowing. He asked for something to drink, and the king gave him some fresh water. The sun had already set, and the king, with the hermit's help, carried the wounded man into the hut. The man lay quietly with his eyes closed. The king too fell asleep as he was tired after his walk and the work he had done. Waking up the next morning, the king was confused of his whereabouts. He was surprised to find a strange bearded man by his side, gazing intently, meaning very attentively at him. The man started to speak to him in a weak voice, seeking forgiveness from the king. This surprised the king, as he did not know the man, and so he did not have anything to forgive him for. The man then revealed that he was an enemy who wanted to take revenge on the king because the king had executed his brother and seized his property. The man said that he had waited for the king's return, but the day passed, and so he came out of his ambush, meaning place of hiding before attack. The bodyguards recognized him and wounded him, but he escaped from them. He would have bled to death had the king not dressed his wound. He felt guilty that while he wished to kill the king saved his life. He was so thankful that he was ready to serve the king all his life. The king was relieved to have made peace with an enemy. He not only forgave him, but said that he would send his men and his own physician to attend to him. The king then took leave of him and went out of the hut to look for the hermit. Before going away, he wished to beg for an answer to the questions he had asked. The hermit was outside on his knees, sowing seeds in the beds that had been dug the day before. The king approached him and asked for the answers again. The hermit's reply that the questions have already been answered puzzled the king. Seeing his confusion, the hermit explained that if he would have not pitied the hermit's weakness and stayed to dig the beds, he would have gone back and would have been killed by that man. So the most important time was when he was digging the beds, and the hermit was the most important man, and to do him good was the king's most important business. Later, in the evening, the most important time was when the king was attending to that man. He would have died without having made peace with him, if the king would not have bandaged his wounds. So he was the most important man, and what the king did for him was the most important business. The hermit concluded that there is only one time that is important: now. Now is the most important time because it is the only time when we have any power. The most necessary person is the one with whom you are, for who you do not know whether you will ever have dealings with anyone else. And the most important thing is to do this person good, because for that purpose alone he was sent into this life.